Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 294. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach. And today, I'm here with another first-timer. Happy to have you, though. Kiaya Jackson from Decatur. How's it going, Kiaya?
Pretty good. I'm happy to be here.
I am happy to have you. Now, you were recommended to me by two different mutual friends of the show. Drew Foster was the first person who put you on my radar. He is a longtime collaborator of ours and actually runs a podcast with us on our premium network. But also, of course, BMAC, Brandon Mccaghren, would speak very highly of you as well. That said, though, how about I turn this over to you? Why don't you give yourself an introduction and let everyone know who you are?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm Kiaya Jackson. I'm a brown belt under BMAC here at Planet Decatur. I've been training for the last 6.5 years, and I've been heavily on the competition scene for the last 3.5 years, I'd say. Nice.
And something that is interesting is that your background actually resonates quite well with me. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you've come in from an engineering and a tech background, right? And you have made the move over to being a jiu-jitsu full-time pro?
Yeah, so when I first started jiu-jitsu, it was because I needed something to do outside of school. Like, I never had intentions on joining jiu-jitsu and making it my life or like making it a career. I was just needing something to do to kind of relieve some steam. And so I tried my first gym and I was like, this is kind of cool, but you know, life kind of happens and you get away from it a bit. So I maybe like tried to attend that gym for a month. And then, you know, as luck would have it, I ended up getting an engineering internship here in Alabama. And one of the guys in the cabinet shop of the place that I worked in, he was like, hey, I think I was wearing like a jiu-jitsu shirt. And he was just like, hey, do you do jiu-jitsu? You should come check out 10 Planet Muscle shows. And I was like, I mean, I don't. I really kind of like bought this shirt to support the gym that I was at. But okay, I'll come check it out. And so I ended up checking out the gym and completely fell in love with the community, with the environment, and really with the sport. And I just decided, like, all right, I'm not feeling super fulfilled in what I'm doing right now. I've had 2 engineering internships at this point, and I just cannot think about doing this every single day. So I'm going to just kind of the typical follow your passions and see where that leads. So that was the first step. I ended up like quitting my job and calling Brandon and being like, hey, I think I want to, move out of this. Can you help me?
Interesting. I got to ask, what was the point, or was there a point where you realized, you know what, I want to do this full time? Because a lot of people get into jiu-jitsu for fun with no intention of ever making it a career. But I mean, in our community, I've got a ton of people who come in from a legal or a finance or an engineering background, and they walked away from all of it because at some point their love of jiu-jitsu eclipsed their love of what they had been doing elsewhere. And they decided that the only way they could really have a fulfilling career path is to focus it around jiu-jitsu. I mean, that's not going to be the case for everyone, but I see that a lot. I'd just love to know, was there a moment or something that happened or a set of circumstances that took you to that point where you realized this is something I have to do?
Yeah, so there were a couple of things that happened. So when I found the first internship or the second internship here in Alabama, it was my second one. And so the only reason that I started to search for, so whenever you're an engineering student, you have to do 2 rotations before you're, able to graduate, or before it's advised that you should do 2 rotations before you graduate, just to say that you have some experience and you look like you're more readily available to like hit the ground running when you make it. But the first one that I had, I was okay for the first 4 or 5 months on that rotation. But then it became super monotonous. Like, it was like I woke up every day, I did the exact same thing, and I didn't really know why. There was no real purpose behind it other than, hey, I'm going to have this prestigious job and I'm going to make enough money to live comfortably. And so, I was like, maybe it's the job. So I went out to search for a different type of internship in a different field. I ended up in Alabama, and before long, I kind of just felt the same things. Like, I'm not feeling super fulfilled. I do the same thing every day with no real reason other than, I'm going to make a bunch of money and I'll have a prestigious job. And so at some point, I remember like driving to work and I was like crying and I couldn't understand why. And so when I got to my job, I was like, I think this is the problem. And so I called Brandon that day.
Nice. And I got to ask, if you can share, what did Brandon say? What did he do? Because for those who don't know Brandon Mccaghren, he's been on the podcast many times. He's a very well-known figure in the Jiu-Jitsu community, runs 10th Planet Decatur. But one of the things that has always stood out to me about Brandon is that he is just so generous and supportive with his time and his resources. He's the kind of guy that will go out of his way to help and support and build you up, even if he barely knows you. I've never met Brandon in person. I've only spoken to him a few times, really, but he has done a lot to help BJJ Mental Models. Again, there's no reason why he should. I'm sure he's got many, many other projects on the go, but he just has always struck me as that kind of guy. So I'd love to know if you can share, what did he do to kind of put you on this path? And the reason I'm asking all of this for the listeners' benefit, we'll get to this in a second, but I'd love to know kind of what he said or did that steered you in this direction and helped you reach the point that you're at now.
Yeah, so again, he's a super kind and generous guy. And at this point, I had only been coming up to train with him. So my first gym was 10th Planet Muscle Shoals. It's like 45 minutes away from Decatur. And he used to come and just every other week he'd come by and teach a class there and kind of just check in on the school. We're like sister schools at this point. And he was like, hey, you could be really good at this. You should start coming to Decatur to train on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I was like, okay. At this point, I'm working 32 hours a week at this internship and also taking classes because I'm still trying to finish school. Right now, I'm just like a junior engineer is what they called it. And so I called him that day and he was like, I understand. Let me know what you need. I told him specifically, I was like, hey, I'm willing to like teach a kids class. I'm willing to clean toilets. Like, I got some money saved up because I kind of figured this day would come. So I saved a bunch of money first. I was like, I'm willing to do whatever you need me to do. If you need me to, edit your videos or help you with your website or whatever, I'm willing to do it. Just please help, if you can, help me out. Cause, we kind of talked about, we had a couple of conversations beforehand with me being dissatisfied with work and not feeling as fulfilled in life. And so he kind of understood the situation and just kind of all came to a point. And when I called him, he was just like, okay, tell me what you need. Tell me how much you need to survive. And we'll give you, we'll find some jobs for you. There's some stuff around the gym I'm sure we need done. Let me talk to Lindsay, his wife, my other coach. Let me talk to Lindsay. Let me see what we need done. And then we can help you out. And so I sat at my desk, I wrote my 2 weeks notice, and then I just looked at my budget, I looked at my savings, and I was like, I called him back with a number, and he called me back and was like, okay, let's run it. Here's the things I need you to do at the gym.
Nice. Now, this all ties into the topic I wanted to talk about with you here today. So we had been brainstorming about a lot of different topics. You actually came onto my radar because on our premium feed, Drew Foster has a podcast he does with us called State of the Meta, where he does breakdowns and analysis of the current competition scene, of the meta game. And one of the things he was doing, he did a whole episode on the Ruotolo. For those who don't know, basically it's a back arm triangle, a technique that was extremely rare until just recently. And Drew said to me that I should talk to you about it because apparently you have just a murderous Ruotolo. But as we were talking, you touched on a few things that really lit up my interest in an area that I think will benefit almost everybody who listens to this. And that is how to build a non-traditional but still successful career path in jiu-jitsu. And the reason I say this is because there's many people who, a lot of people, they will start and they'll do jiu-jitsu just for a hobby and they never really have any ambitions to make money off of this thing. But a lot of people fall in love with this instantly and they decide this is what they want to do for the rest of their lives. And similarly, a lot of people get into this thinking it's just going to be a hobby for me. I love it, but it's just for fun. But then at some point, something happens in their life and they change their mind and they say, no, I want to abandon everything and I want to find a way to do jiu-jitsu as a career. But the problem that many people have is they don't think there's a path to do that. They don't think it's possible unless either number one, they become an incredibly successful or famous competitive grappler, or number two, they open a really successful gym, which a lot of people don't want to do. I would say that generally speaking, the way that most people in jiu-jitsu traditionally build a job out of this and succeed is they start a gym. But what I believe and what I think you are evidence of, and maybe what I am evidence of, is that there is a lot of room in the jiu-jitsu scene for people who aren't like the most famous athletes in the world or people who don't want to run a gym. There's a lot of other ways to build your careers. And a lot of people, I think they hesitate to make that leap because of a sunk cost, right? They've already invested so much of their life in building up another career. And it seems like suicide economically to walk away from a good job opportunity to focus on pajama wrestling, right? So with that said, I'm going to turn this over to you. I mean, open up the books here. Tell me about what you've done, what you've built, and ultimately like how you pay the bills in a non-traditional way within this jiu-jitsu space, because I think people will find it quite enlightening.
Yeah, for sure. So can we go back to like the sunken cost thing? Because I've 100% felt that. I have maybe 5 or 6 classes to finish a degree, my mechanical engineering degree. And at some point, I think I will as like a side project, but I know for a fact that I will never work another engineering job. And so I felt that for a long time, what took me so long to pull the trigger on just leaving my job and leaving that career path is that I kept thinking, oh man, I've made it so far. I might as well finish. My mom said the same thing. She's like, you're so far, you might as well finish. And I will, but I know that I will not be using the degree. It will be more like, hey, I started a thing and I plan to finish it, and less like I need this to make a living. So that was one thing I really wanted to like touch on. When you said it, I was like, oh yeah, I felt that sunken cost. But what I do right now, so when I first got to the gym, it was more like, hey, I'm cleaning toilets, I'm teaching the kids class, I'm showing up, I'm helping edit videos, and I'm working on Brandon's website. So Brandon has this instructional website, which is like, right now it's BJJ 365. But at the time when I was working on it or learning to build and maintain websites, it was BrandonMC.ninja. And so that was like the first job where I was like, okay, I could see myself continuing to do this because it gave me the freedom to train whenever I wanted and kind of work on my own time. So I really jumped deep off into building and managing membership portals for different gyms and different social media influencers. And so that was like my first little bit of, hey, there's a way to make some money out of this, but it just might not be in jiu-jitsu exactly. It might not be from competition or owning a gym.
Yeah, that's a brilliant insight. I think that many people, when they look at how I could make money out of jiu-jitsu, they take a very narrow lens at that, and they look at just the jiu-jitsu itself. And they think, well, if I just make jiu-jitsu and do jiu-jitsu and sell jiu-jitsu, then maybe I'll be able to make money off of this. But I think something that you've established is that if you can look at jiu-jitsu not as just the martial art, but as a business sector, then one of the things you quickly realize is there is a massive need and a massive demand for people in that space. There's not necessarily a huge demand for actual instructors all the time. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who are good at jiu-jitsu, but there are very, very few people who are good at the business of jiu-jitsu. So, I mean, you brought up a great example, right? If you want to just start making instructionals and putting them up on Fanatics, unless you've got an incredible track record, probably you're not going to get a lot of traction. But if you have a skill or a service that you can offer, and you can find someone who is that great, famous jiu-jitsu instructor, and you can volunteer that service to them, you can almost always get a really good skill swap going on. Because I don't know, Kiaya, about you, but my experience has been that most jiu-jitsu people are incredible at jiu-jitsu, but kind of shit at everything else. And they sort of hate doing it, right? Like the reason why most jiu-jitsu instructors have like garbage websites and newsletters is because not only do they not have any interest in doing that stuff, sometimes they're actively afraid of it, which I just find absolutely hilarious, right? You see these people and they have no fear going out and competing in front of 10,000 people. But the idea of like opening up a computer and typing something into MailChimp or Kajabi just terrifies them to no end. And that's an area where regular people can help out a ton. I think people worry way too much about, well, is my jiu-jitsu good enough to sell? But what they really should be worrying about is, what skills do I have that I can bring to the business ecosystem of jiu-jitsu? Because I guarantee you, if you've got a skill that is even remotely useful, whether it be just helping out around the gym or doing taxes or updating a website or doing graphic design, you can find a high quality, high caliber athlete who will skill swap with you, and then you can leverage their name and both of you win. I think that's a very underutilized path here, and I think you've given a great example of that.
Yeah, 100%. When I first started working with one of my clients, he was just like, listen, I could 100% sit down and figure out how to do this. He owns a really big wrestling school here in Alabama. He was like, I could sit down and figure out how to do this, but I promise you I will not do it. And so I would much rather pay you to help me out, or maybe we like swap skills like you said, and you help me out versus me trying to go through this thing. So a lot of my clients had that same mentality of, hey, I will not do this thing, or I'm going to do it and it's not going to be that great of a job. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So now with that said, you've done a lot more than just help out around the gym. You've done a lot more than just help people with websites. You also have at least two really notable businesses that you've started up. So maybe before we steer any further, why don't you introduce those so that people understand what we're going to be talking about here and how other people can maybe learn from some of the lessons that you've applied in building up those companies?
Yeah, so one of the best things about being here at Planet Decatur is that you're underneath these guys who are like really, specifically Brandon and Lindsay and staff, who are like really business minded. And so they understand jiu-jitsu and they love jiu-jitsu, but they also understand how like social media works. And they are the people that introduced me into this way of making money outside of just doing jiu-jitsu, because obviously that's the challenge right now, is making money while just doing jiu-jitsu. So they've helped me just really, get into business and think more like a business person versus just a jiu-jitsu athlete. So for a long time, I was just saying, I'm just a jiu-jitsu athlete. And Brandon would go, well, you're going to need something else. And so I started off with this website, which was like Train with Kiaya J. And it was just me sharing my workouts that I was doing and some jiu-jitsu tips. At the time, I was like a blue belt, so not many jiu-jitsu tips. I didn't have much to share. But eventually that kind of transformed into SoPro Training. And it's just a different name with, a more in-depth look at jiu-jitsu or training in general. So with the SoPro Training, instead of just posting jiu-jitsu techniques, I feel like we have a lot of websites that, do instructionals and show you techniques and focus on just the training. I try to focus on the other 22 hours. So there's this saying that's like, hey, for the 2 hours that you're in training, that's not necessarily the most important time of the day. It's important, but it's not the most important. The other 22 hours where you have to get your rest and manage your stress and do your strength and conditioning and make sure your nutrition is on point. And you have to be like feeding your mind and studying film and stuff. My website is more about the other 22 hours. So while there are like some jiu-jitsu techniques there, I have a bunch of different instructions and positions covered. There's also strength and conditioning and, tips for recovery. And we talk a lot about comp and comp mindset. And so we're really just, trying to push the other 22 hours versus add to the ever-growing instructional list.
That's a great insight as well. I think when people decide they want to get into jiu-jitsu content creation, they always think, well, technique instructionals, right? That's what everyone does. And man, I would say that for the vast majority of people out there, getting into technique instructional is not a great idea. And the reason why is because that's the obvious path. Everyone else is doing the same thing. And it's not sufficient to just record stuff and get it out there and expect that people will pay you for it. If you want to make money off of something you're making, it has to be not just as good or better than what everyone else is doing, but it has to be so much better that people would be motivated to quit whatever they're currently using and use yours instead. And so the challenge that I think jiu-jitsu technique stuff has, it's so saturated, right? And that's not even getting into instructionals that you can buy on sites like Fanatics. I mean, there's incredible free stuff on YouTube that you're competing with. It's a solved problem, I believe. I mean, it's already out there. There's already so much technique. One more person adding technique videos out there is unlikely to rattle the world. The example I always give is look at what Lachlan is doing with Submeta, right? He's employing developers to build an incredibly powerful site, and he's built one of the best libraries of technique videos that you will ever find out there. And on top of that, he's Lachlan Giles. I mean, can you outperform him? Can you build a better site? Do you have more access to better developers? Can you create better content? Probably not, right? So if your business plan is to create a not as good version of Submeta, like you're not really setting yourself up for success. Whereas I agree with you completely that I think there's so much opportunity to address the rest of the calendar, the rest of the clock, make sure that we're talking about things that can benefit people outside of the training room. And there is so much more to jiu-jitsu than just the techniques. And so I think that by carving out that niche, you've done something very smart here. You've identified a new path that isn't already oversaturated, and you're attacking that. And that also has the benefit of creating a strong identity for your brand so that people will immediately understand what it is you're doing. So when you say to me, for example, that your job is to address the other 22 hours of the day, that's great marketing. I know exactly what you mean. Whereas if you were selling instructionals on Fanatics and you say, oh yeah, we're making another Anaconda instructional, it's one of the 200 Anaconda instructionals on there, that's not really a compelling sales pitch, right? You're competing with people who are much more accomplished athletically. So I think that's a great strategy. And you've very correctly identified how important it is to find that niche and be very clear about it and kind of not try to beat people at their own game, but to create a completely new game that you can definitely win.
Yeah, 100%. This whole strategy, so at first it was trained with Kiaya J, and it was just the strength and conditioning, but this whole strategy really just kind of came out of something that I personally felt like I needed as a competitor or as someone who wanted to take jiu-jitsu seriously or take my health and showing up from like my teammates seriously. Like I feel like I needed some resources in all of these other areas. And so I would have a strength and conditioning coach. I would, buy the recovery tools that I needed and buy these different sites. And I was just thinking, hey man, if I could put all of the stuff that I've learned and all of the like tools that I use into one place, that would be so beneficial to any other athletes that are looking to really maximize their time or maximize their day.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, how did you get started on that? Because when you're planning to build a product, getting to the point where you've got enough that you feel you can sell it is really hard. I mean, I can say with BJJ Mental Models, right? When we started off, I really wasn't even sure exactly what we could sell because we didn't have much there. But after consistently making stuff both on our main feed and our premium feed for 5 years, now I can look at our content library and it's unimpeachable. It's way ahead of what a lot of other people are doing. But it took a long time to get there. And it's a hard sell to tell people, well, you've got to hustle and work and make stuff for years and years before anyone's going to be willing to pay for it. So how do you balance that? Like, how did you get to the point where you had something you were comfortable presenting? And how do you know when you've hit that point where, okay, I could actually monetize this and maybe even live off of this financially?
So one thing I really got from the power of social media, one thing I really learned about the power of social media is that you can start and, not have that big of a following and just make the things that you want to make and use that to test and feel and see what people are interested in. So honestly, when I was still in Planet Muscle Shows, so this is like 2017, 2018, one of the most like valuable tips that Brandon gave me was to just keep posting on social media. So if you scroll all the way down on my Instagram, you'll see like my content takes different shapes and forms as I like evolve and figure out what it is that I need and what it is I think that people need or are interested in. So at first it was just fitness content and Brandon was just like, yeah, just keep posting that every day. Keep posting, keep making content, get in front of the camera, make sure you're like writing out the things that you're doing and what you're learning, and just use that as like the base for your content. So I started doing that just over and over and over. And at first, it didn't really matter as much because nobody was looking at it. And so I could experiment and change my style, what I was talking about, to gauge what people were interested in. And then as my following grew, it became a lot easier for me to like know who my audience was. And what's funny is on different platforms, my audience is just a little bit different. And so I've been tailoring what I talk about and what I teach and what I share to what my audience likes and what would be the most useful for them.
Nice. I read a book recently called $1 Million Weekend by Noah Kagan. He's the founder of the tech company AppSumo. You might actually be familiar with him if you worked in the space. And one of the things that he talks about is something he calls the law of 100. And basically what he says is, if you want to start something new and you want to have success, don't worry too much about how you're going to succeed or fail right away. The first thing you have to do is commit to 100 reps. So whatever it is that you want to do, commit, regardless of how well it goes, to doing 100 iterations of it. Sort of like how if you are starting a new exercise routine, you would not expect that after one session in the gym, you're going to get jacked, right? It is a process. So if you want to see results, you have to commit to consistency over time. So that's where the reps comes from, right? So commit to 100 reps over time. And I would say that very much applies if you want to start something new and start building up your reputation, especially in the jiu-jitsu space. People often ask me, like, how do you build, a successful jiu-jitsu brand? Or, hey, I want to get people onto my newsletter or my website or whatever. How do I do that? What I always say is the most important thing is do it consistently and don't stop. I mean, really, one of the only reasons why a lot of the major jiu-jitsu YouTube channels and podcasts out there are so successful is because they've been consistent for a very long time. There's a lot of podcasts that got, 20 episodes in and then just died, right? I mean, remember Matt Burn? That was a thing for about 20 to 40 episodes, but it's very hard to maintain consistency over time, especially if you're not getting results right away. And so the most important thing is to commit to put in those reps. And I think you bring that up quite wisely here, like the importance of being consistent on social media. So easy to get discouraged because at the beginning, you don't necessarily see a lot of results. And the growth is not always linear. Sometimes you go like months, maybe even years without seeing big growth. But then one day you just post the right thing at the right time and it explodes and takes off and it can change your life. You're only going to get those opportunities if you're consistent over time. So yeah, I think that's good advice that you got. It's not so much about worrying about making your posts perfect or anything. It's just make stuff, get it out there, be consistent, and learn from the feedback.
Yeah, the first time I turned the camera on and talked to it was the most awkward. So I'm not a super social person and I struggle with like talking to people, anxiety and stuff. And so the first time I turned that camera on, I was just like, oh no, this is going to be terrible. My voice changed. I couldn't like look into the camera. It was like I was fidgety and it was just awful. And so my first instinct was to just avoid that feeling and not turn the camera back on ever again. But just putting those reps in, being dedicated to showing up and putting those reps in, like you just said, is the best thing that you can do. And that really applies to everything. We learn it first in jiu-jitsu, and then you learn it in the gym, and then you learn it with just sitting in front of the camera. I've learned it through building websites. The first website I built was awful, god awful. But, just putting those reps in helps you really develop and figure out what your style is and figure out like if it's something you really want to do. After, like you said, 100 reps, if it's not what you enjoy or if it's not something that you can be proud of, then okay, maybe you pivot. But if you see some progress, if you start to feel a little bit better about your work, then just keep working at it, keep hammering. And that's pretty much what happened with me.
Now, let's talk about pivoting here. You mentioned earlier that you started off with like a training blog or a training site, and you've since pivoted and kind of productized that knowledge. Now, again, consistency matters, but consistency is only good if you take the opportunity to learn from the mistakes that you made and adjust and pivot. If you're being consistent, but you're consistently making the same mistake over and over again without any adjustment, the value to you over the long term is going to be pretty minimal. So at some point, you must have realized that you needed to pivot and switch out. You talked about how You used to primarily have a training website, and you also did a lot of one-off services like web development. But at some point you switched to building your own thing. How did that come about? And when did you realize that that was the right approach for you?
So it was kind of always in the background, just because when I first felt that little taste of dissatisfaction with my job and the career path that I chose, I immediately started looking for an out. But just starting off, you can't just go, oh yeah, I'm out. I'm going to go all in on my fitness YouTube and my fitness Instagram and my fitness website. So it was kind of always in the background. I just didn't necessarily have the tools or the resources or the time to pull it off. And so it started off as just fitness. But again, as I grew and evolved and my needs kind of changed, I wasn't just doing like basic bodybuilder style workouts anymore. I wasn't eating for aesthetics. I was trying to fuel my training, and I needed to like learn about that side of things. And so as I learned and I grew and my goals kind of changed, that's kind of what made me pivot. Like, so that the training that I did changed, and I wasn't talking to the same audience anymore. I couldn't quite relate as much to the style of training or the people that did the style of training that I used to do. It wasn't in my wheelhouse anymore. I was more focused on strength and conditioning for jiu-jitsu and nutrition to fuel my training and how to recover when I've done 5-6 sessions this week on top of my strength and conditioning.
Mm-hmm. You know, that's something actually that I have found as well. Being general and broad, it sounds good in theory, because if you make something general, like strength and conditioning content, I mean, yes, there's a much larger potential audience out there, right? There's millions, maybe billions of people around the world that you could address and sell to. But the problem is you're also not standing out or making yourself unique in any way. You're just another one of hundreds of thousands of content creators doing variants of the same thing. So something that's counterintuitive and that I have found is very helpful is to just laser focus and be more specific. So again, in your example, you know, narrowing down the focus so you're talking specifically about strength and conditioning for jiu-jitsu. On one hand, that massively shrinks the number of potential viewers and customers that you could have. But on the other hand, it makes you stand out way better to the people who are left over. So yeah, I mean, maybe you don't have 1 billion potential customers anymore, but you might still have 1 million. That's a lot, right? You could do a lot with 1 million customers. And something I've heard people advise on is like, you can never actually be too narrow in your audience choice. And that's kind of counterintuitive because you think, well, don't I want to be like PewDiePie and make stuff that everyone and their mom knows about? I mean, you can grow into that. You might be able to get lucky and get that kind of audience. But for most people, the more focused you are, the more your message will resonate with any particular crew. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're saying that you went through. And it's that process of refining the vision that made things really sticky for the people who are following you.
Yeah. One of my mentors told me this and it kind of stuck with me. And he was like, hey, if you're talking to everybody, you're not talking to nobody. And he said it just like that. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. So I can't speak to everyone because I can't cover all of these different aspects, but I can cover something that I am familiar with. And that's why I decided to kind of pivot and go with, all right, here's the mindset we need to be training and competing. Here's the nutrition we need. Here are some strength and conditioning workouts that I do and might help you out instead of, here, I'm a fitness coach and let's just do fitness for everyone. If you're not talking to someone in particular, if you don't have an avatar, if you don't have a person, your ideal client that you're trying to help, then you can't really help anyone.
Now, maybe we should expand on that because I love that term. You said you need to have an avatar. Now, we're not talking about like The Last Airbender here. We're not talking about James Cameron. We're talking about product design. Can you maybe explain what you mean by that? Like, what is an avatar and why is it important to have one?
So your avatar is like your ideal customer or ideal client. And it's important for you to get, so in order to get clear on your messaging, you have to be clear on who you're talking to. And so your avatar is a person that you've kind of built up in your head. This is the ideal person that you're talking to. Maybe it's Susan. Susan is 25, 35 years old. Susan lives in Alabama and she has 3 kids and she's just trying to get in shape. So I'm trying to like really build this person up and then answer questions and offer solutions to problems that Susan might have. Susan might not want to become a bodybuilder. She has 3 kids and she barely has time to go to the gym. So why would I create a product for a bodybuilding competition or a bodybuilding competitor? I would refocus my energy into creating a product that's for Susan, who has 30 minutes to get in the gym and needs this to kind of help mitigate stress. So your avatar is just someone who, like your ideal client, the person that you're talking to. In order to get clear on what it is that you need to be providing, you have to get clear on who your avatar is.
Now, how do you know what your avatar is? Because the funny thing about customers is they can't always tell you what they really need. They might be able to tell you what they think they want, but they can't always tell you what they actually need. You know, it's like the old quote that's often attributed to Henry Ford. I don't know if it's true or not, but he said something to the effect of, if I asked my customers for what they wanted, they would have told me that they want a faster horse, right? Not a car. And so a lot of the time customers don't know exactly what they need. So in the product design world, this makes things a bit challenging because you can't always just ask them. You have to kind of set up a whole series of experiments and use a combination of data and intuition. But how do you figure this out? Because, I mean, as you know, if you were to go and poll 100 people and say, hey, I'm trying to build a product, tell me what you want, just because you listen to them doesn't mean they'll actually tell you what they really, really need. They'll just tell you what they think they want, but that's not always the same thing. So how do you kind of sort that out? Like, how do you know when you found a real, authentic avatar versus just what people are saying without really thinking about?
Yeah, I personally use social media to kind of experiment and see what it is that people are super interested in, or what type of people follow the specific content. And from there, I'd start to create solutions. So most recently, I posted about things I wish I would have done differently with my strength and conditioning when I first started jiu-jitsu. And, you know, I got the conversation going with people in my audience, and people started asking different questions like, all right, what do you think you should have done differently about your food? Or like, what do you think you should have done differently about training? Or somebody said something like, I wish I would have learned to rest a little bit more. And so people started to really contribute to that conversation. And that kind of set me off as like, hey, people are interested in knowing this thing. So a lot of my audience right now might be people that are either getting into jiu-jitsu, just starting, and they're looking for advice on how to be more efficient with their training, or just people that are already in and looking to correct some of their past mistakes. So I like to use social media as like my tester and my feeler for what people like and what services I think people might need. So I never ask, hey, do you think you need a strength and conditioning program? It's like, no, I'm also like my ideal avatar. And so I kind of know that they might need a strength and conditioning program. And then I'll make a couple of videos just talking about that and see where people might need help. But overall, I kind of decide on the product based on what I need and what I think my ideal avatar would need.
Yeah, something that I have found helpful is to look not necessarily at what people out there are saying, but to look at what they're not saying. So if, for example, if everyone and their dog is talking about one specific thing, that's on the topic of everyone's minds, it's something that they're thinking about, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what they want. It just might be what they think they want based on where the zeitgeist is at. But a lot of the time, the thing people really need is something that no one is talking about. And if you go out there and you post something on social media that's kind of off the beaten path and that no one else is saying, and you get a ton of engagement on it, then that's an indicator to you that you've maybe found something. I think the mistake a lot of people make is they will look at what everyone else is saying and doing, and they'll pattern after that. But sometimes you find something that no one is saying, but then when you go out there and you say it, a whole bunch of people say, you know what? That's what I'm looking for. I never thought of it. No one had said it, but I'm glad someone finally did. I think that in jiu-jitsu, there's a big opportunity there because, again, so many people kind of chase the zeitgeist and the meta, and they almost do that blindly at some times. But what people have to remember, I mean, yes, I know, for example, that Danaher and Gordon are going to be the ones selling the vast majority of instructionals, but odds are, if you're listening to this podcast, there's a 99.99999% chance that you are not Gordon Ryan. Right? And so just because Gordon is the best in the world, that doesn't mean that he's the one who has the best lesson for you right now, right this moment. You have the ability to carve out a problem and put it in front of someone and get their attention. And if you can speak to them more directly than Gordon can, you can get that business even if you're not a multi-time world champion. And that's something that I think people sometimes don't think about enough. And I agree with you that social media is a great tool for this because, I mean, I have found it's very hard to make sales off of social media, but to go out there and put out ideas and see how they resonate, it's very powerful for that. Social media, even if you're not directly selling things, it can be a great way to test ideas and see what's sticky and what people are willing to act on.
Yeah, social media as like a filler has been like a tester, not necessarily a filler, has just been amazing. Like you said, you might be able to get out and say what everybody else is saying, but then you're just adding to the echo. We're all echoing the same thing. But if you can say something different, or if you can get out there and really speak your mind on, something that people might be missing, then you'll essentially attract your ideal, audience or ideal avatar.
Now, on that note, I mean, social media has a lot of strengths, but it also has weaknesses too. And I think sometimes people overestimate how important a big social media following can be. I know a lot of people who have massive social media followings and they make basically no money off of it. And that is one of the things about social media is that although you can get a broad reach, getting people to be deeply engaged with you can be really challenging. And even if you do get them to engage with you, getting them to spend can be even more challenging. So do you have any thoughts on how to use social media productively? Because it is a powerful tool, but you also have to make sure it doesn't become something that's sucking up 8 hours of your day every day and isn't actually moving the needle and generating money for you.
Yeah, so I actually fell into this trap early on when I was starting to see some success, especially on TikTok. All of my content was pretty much like, look at me, look at me, look at me content. It's kind of how I describe it. It's like, it's about me, but it's not saying anything in particular, It's not helping anything. It's just adding to the content machine. It's not helping anyone accomplish anything. And so a lot of followings can be built, like you can get a lot of people to follow you based on little things like how you look or you saying something funny or doing something funny. But that doesn't necessarily translate into dollars. I mean, maybe through brand deals, which I was able to get a few of those, but ultimately that's like not sustainable. So you have to, if you're going to use it as a business person or with a business mind, you have to be providing value. And honestly, I think that's just a better way in general to use social media because after a while, it gets kind of old just posting photos of yourself or you doing great in competition. Like it doesn't add anything into the universe. It just kind of hypes you up for a little bit. You check your likes and your views and you feel okay, and then nothing. You don't really help anyone. You definitely don't make any money off of it outside of like brand deals, but it's just better to provide value.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would say, and I think you are doing the right thing here, is whatever the core of your business is going to be, you want to make sure that it's something that you own and can control. It needs to be something that is dependable and you have full agency over. If the core of your business is your Instagram account or your YouTube channel, you have to understand that you are building your house on someone else's property. You don't own that platform. And social media sites are notoriously volatile when it comes to their terms of service and how they change things, right? If your entire source of revenue is YouTube ads, you can roll in one day and find out that YouTube just doesn't like your content anymore and now you're broke. Or maybe something happens to your channel or your account and it gets taken down, right? I mean, I don't know if you've ever had to try to deal with the support systems from YouTube or social media networks, but it's very hard to get them to do anything for you because, they've got billions of customers sometimes and most of them don't pay any money, including you. So what's their motivation to really help this one person's YouTube channel? So you just have to be very careful of that. I think that is another risk of social media as well, is if you become too dependent on it. Whereas what you're proposing, what you've done, I mean, I know that you've built sites yourself on top of Kajabi. So you basically own that stuff, right? You have a paying relationship with Kajabi. That's what I do as well also. And that means that I've got a degree of control. I can dictate what's going to happen on my own site to my own product. Whereas I know a lot of people have leaned too heavily on their social or on YouTube, and then one day their whole business just evaporated overnight because of a platform decision, which is something you never want to have happen to your business.
Right. That actually happened to me with TikTok. So for a while, I also do like SoPro Apparel. And for a while I was, just posting my shirts, which was like wake up and choose violence, which to us is like, oh, it's cool because we do jiu-jitsu and we understand the meaning behind it. The shirt was originally even created for a 6 a.m. class, but TikTok decided at some point after selling like, 200 or 300 shirts, they decided like, oh, this is against the community guidelines. But they like, we made the money, they took their cut, and then they were like, oh yeah, this is against community guidelines. And it's like, oh, I can't sell these here anymore. Versus if I had my own site where I was selling my apparel, that would never be a problem. So I had to like deal with customer support. And eventually, after a few months, they were like, oh yeah, it's fine. We'll put the stuff back up, but you've already kind of lost so many customers and so many like potential fans of the brand just in those couple of months because TikTok is pushing a new thing out every second. Every time you scroll, there's a new thing to sell or a new thing to look at. And so, yeah, like you said, it's super volatile. And when you build your brand on top of social media, when you build your business on top of social media, only with social media, it can kind of blow up in your face sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one last thing I want to ask you, Kiaya, is financially, like what should someone's goal be here if they want to do this full time? Because look, it is unlikely you're going to build the next Microsoft as a jiu-jitsu service company. The market is just too small. But my advice has always been that you don't necessarily need to do that. You just need to get your business to the point where you hit that magic freedom number where you have enough coming in that you don't have to work on anything else and you can focus on growing this thing. And then once you can go into something fully dedicated, you can just watch things explode because you can put a lot more effort into it. But I would ask you, how do you know that point? Because transitioning out of another career, a lot of people are not going to just stop their job stone cold and then go into jiu-jitsu the next day. A lot of people are going to kind of do a gradual taper off, and they're probably looking for a point where it's time to pull the trigger and focus on this full time. Do you have any like financial advice for people or suggestions on how to get to that point and when to know when you've hit that point and it makes sense to pivot away and go all in on your business?
I honestly don't think I am the best example because I did just say, screw it all, I'll figure it out. And, that comes with its challenges. But I will say that reason that I was able to make this big pivot and just change things up is because I did have savings and I did have a number that was safe for me. And so before I did jump off in the deep end, but before I jumped in the deep end, I wanted to make sure that I had 6 months covered. I had a budget. I stuck to my budget. I saved my money and I had 6 months covered at least. And I jumped off in the deep end. But, for most people, that's not enough because 6 months, it's not that long of a time in the grand scheme of things. And, if you don't have it all figured out right away, you're going to run into some problems. So I don't know if I'm the best person to go, here's your magic number. But my simple advice that I would give is just to look at your budget and figure out what it is that you're willing to live with and what you're willing to live without. And just start basing your decisions on that. Like, hey, am I hitting my minimum every month? Am I able to, put money into my savings? Am I able to take care of all my needs and my necessities? And just go off of that because that's pretty much what I did. I don't know if that is like the best financial advice. I don't know if I'm the best person to give financial advice, but that's kind of what I did there.
Makes sense. One thing that I could suggest to people, and I've seen this work, is if you want to get into jiu-jitsu as a job, but you don't really have an idea of what you could do, what kind of product could I make, or how could I make this look? If you're not really sure, as a thought experiment, take whatever job title you currently have and just add "but for jiu-jitsu" to the end of it and see if that makes sense as something you could sell. So if you're an accountant, what if you were an accountant but for jiu-jitsu? Because there are a lot of people who have a professional skill set that they bring in, and they can kind of become a trusted authority within the jiu-jitsu community selling that skill set. So marketing is a great example. There are a lot of people who specialize in marketing, but for jiu-jitsu, or social media, but for jiu-jitsu, and they can leverage that as a skill set. And that way, even if you don't have like a product that you've got in mind that you want to build or sell, you can get deeper into the jiu-jitsu community and make some money off of that, and also build relationships and networks with people who might actually be able to help you more down the road if you do choose to build something a bit more substantial. So that sounds maybe a little bit odd, but like I can tell you, and I'm sure that you've got similar stories, my accountant is a jiu-jitsu black belt that I train with. My plumber, a guy who helps out around my house, is a jiu-jitsu black belt that I've met through jiu-jitsu. If I need home repairs done, I know jiu-jitsu people. Even in other things like marketing and social media, I know a lot of jiu-jitsu people. And if I am trying to do jiu-jitsu marketing, I would much rather hire someone who knows marketing and jiu-jitsu than just someone who only knows marketing, right? So having that intersection of skill sets where you have your professional skill set and you laser focus on jiu-jitsu, you can probably sell that, right? Even if it's something that you don't think, like customer support for jiu-jitsu, absolutely. Pretty much every gym or online digital jiu-jitsu business in the world would probably be willing to hire someone to help deal with emails and social media messages, right? So that is a great opportunity. Even if you don't have grand ambitions to build a product company or whatever, or open a gym, if you just want a job in the space, take what you're already doing. Even if you're like a barista, right? You can offer customer support services to other people. It's a skill set. It's worth more than you probably think it is. And if you narrow it and try to sell it to jiu-jitsu businesses, I think you're probably going to find there's more of an interest there than you might have thought.
Yeah. Brandon has a saying that's like, I only hire samurai. So like people that I train with, people that I've trained with, or that I know are like vetted and absolutely into their craft with jiu-jitsu or martial arts. And that's hell true. That's how we've been able to kind of like grow the gym and really just build our like own brands around here. Is that like we only work with or only hire samurai.
That's a great way of thinking of things. I like that a lot. But now I guess before we tie this up, Kiaya, any closing thoughts on the business front? Any other little nuggets that you want to share? Or did we get into everything here today?
I think closing thoughts would just be, I personally jumped off into the deep end, and that doesn't have to be everybody's story. But if you do have a goal, or like you feel like you're not feeling as fulfilled in your life and you feel like you want to pursue other things, there are ways to do it outside of, just jumping off into the deep end. And you have to be able to just get through whatever you're doing or whatever you're trying to get through and really just go after what you want there. Like, so if you are, working a job, maybe you finish up at your job and you slowly build up your technique website or something. Like, there's a way to do it. I think everything is, I call it figure outable. Everything is figure outable.
Yeah, absolutely. Friend of the show, Nelson Puentes, one of the co-founders of Inverted Gear with his wife, Hillary Witt. I had Nelson on the podcast a long time ago, and that was his advice. He said, you don't need to quit everything and go into your new business on day one with a 100% focus. It is okay to test and experiment and grow this thing as a side hustle. And when it gets traction, then you can make the decision to move over. You don't need to do a big bang. There's nothing right or wrong. I mean, different people prefer different approaches. It very much depends on what your situation is and what the idea is that you've got and how things are structured. But there's a lot of different approaches. And so I would always tell people going into this as a career does not have to be a high risk endeavor. It is something that you can dabble your toes into and take it at your own pace. You don't have to take on a bunch of lifestyle risk in order to try jiu-jitsu as a career.
100%.
Now, with all of that said, Kiaya, we talked about your stuff, but let's talk about it in a little bit more detail. I got to ask about the brand first. SoPro Training. What does SoPro stand for?
So SoPro originally came out of this idea of just being a professional in all things. So for a long time, I was like, oh yeah, I'm a professional jiu-jitsu athlete. But when you're not making money, like, what does that mean and what does that look like? Is a professional just someone who makes money doing something? In my mind, that's not the case. Like, a professional is someone who hones their skills and tries to like grow and develop in whatever they're trying to do or accomplish for not just them, but also for the betterment of mankind. So I just, came up with the name SoPro to just fit into that idea. And I've just really been over the last, 2 or 3 years, just working on building a community of people who I think are professionals in things that they do, whether that be, a professional at being a mom because you're teaching your kids how to deal with their emotions, or a professional at just showing up for yourself. Then to me, you're a professional. Like, you're not only teaching yourself how to be resilient and show up, but you're also inspiring others to do that. To me, in my mind, it's like, oh yeah, this person's a professional. So sort of like a samurai, but in different terms.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So tell us about the brands here. If people want to check out your stuff, where can they go and what can they expect to find?
Yeah, so if you want to check out the apparel, it's SoProApparel.com. We have plenty of rash guard sits and sweatshirts, t-shirts. The most famous one is the Wake Up and Choose Violence sit, the t-shirts and stuff. And then if you want to check out any of the training tools, check out SoProTraining.com.
Awesome. Well, I will make life easy for listeners. I will put links to all of that in the show notes. So just pop open your podcast player and you should be able to quickly tap over and find Kiaya's stuff. I'll also put a link to our stuff. Everything we make lives at bjjmentalmodels.com. Every episode of the podcast, access to our newsletter. We've got a whole database of mental models if you're looking for a good reference on concepts for jiu-jitsu. And of course, everything we do, ultimately it's powered by BJJ Mental Models Premium. That's how we fund this project. We don't run ads. Everything that we do is powered by our premium subscribers. The reasons you might want to become one of them, first of all, you'll get access to what is, to my knowledge, the biggest audio database of masterclasses on strategy, tactics, philosophy, concepts for jiu-jitsu. The main thing that makes us unique, everything we do, or at least most of what we do, is audio focused. Again, there's a lot of other people that specialize in video technique instructionals. We like to target bigger picture concepts that tie things together. You'll also get access to some amazing ongoing premium podcasts. As I mentioned, Drew Foster runs a great podcast called State of the Meta. It's a competition and meta-analysis podcast that you can only get on BJJ Mental Models Premium by being a subscriber. You'll also get access to our kick-ass community. We've got a massive network of black belts around the world who are really invested in making sure that we all grow and get better together. I just can't say enough good things about our community. I think it's worth the price of entry alone. And then beyond that, we also have an upgraded tier where you get direct coaching from quite literally some of the best black belts in the world. Our coaching team includes Brianna St. Marie, Margot Ciccarelli, our friend Drew Foster, Emily Kwok, Dominique Oblanite, Josh McKinney. It's just a massive team with a ton of awesome black belts. I think they've got a collective 20 world championships at all levels between them. So do check that out. First week is free. Link in the show notes, but you can find everything at bjjmentalmodels.com. Kiaya, thanks so much for coming by. This is a great one. This is a topic that I have been wanting to dig into for a while once I find the right guest, because I do think that, look, jiu-jitsu is all fun and good, but for a lot of us, at some point, when you make the decision that, you want to actually do this professionally, conversations like this, I think, have the potential to be life-changing for people. And I hope that's what we've created here today. So again, thank you so much for coming by and sharing your knowledge. I hope this is as beneficial to everyone out there listening as it was to me.
Thank you for having me.
Most welcome, Kiaya. And thanks to the listeners as well. We'll talk to you next time. Take care.